Out front now, Catherine Rampell, columnist at the Washington Post and CNN political commentator, and Michel, a tax policy analyst at the Heritage Foundation, who was an informal advisor to the White House on the tax cut. So, Catherine, do you think these tariffs could wipe out the benefits of the tax cut? If you're looking at numbers like $831 a year, you're right there.
Yeah, I mean, certainly they will weigh on the growth of the economy. We have two studies now, not just the New York Fed study, but there was a second one as well, also by a team of top-notch economists who have also found that 100% of the tariffs so far are being passed along to Americans. They're not being paid by Chinese producers. They're not even being paid by European producers and all of the others that we have already also engaged in a trade war with. They are being passed along to consumers. So, yes, certainly they're going to wipe out a large portion of whatever demand side effect, at the very least, you would see from the tax cuts.
And Adam, to this point, I know you're concerned about this too.
Yeah, taxes are tariffs, and if the tariffs cost $800 to the average American, that's wiping out almost half of what we estimate the average American gets because of the tax cuts. It lowered taxes for typical Americans by about $1,400 in that 1 year, and that's not even taking into consideration all of the economic benefits that are still to come because of the larger economy, higher wages.
Right, all of which, of course, can be, if you're looking at, these are different numbers and estimates, but if you're going to take both of them, 831 of your 1,400 is gone off the bat. Obviously, I'm oversimplifying, but I think it's an important point to make. So, Catherine, this new study by the Congressional Research Service is showing that tax cuts overall, to the point that Adam's making, is not doing as much for the economy as the president has been saying, right, with his words like massive. Here he is.
At the heart of America's revival are the massive tax cuts that I signed into law a year ago. And they are like rocket fuel for America's economy. And thanks to our historic tax cuts and reform, everybody here got a tax cut, everybody.
We have so many companies coming into the United States because of my plan and because of our tax cuts and the tax plan. It's called really Tax Cut and Jobs Plan.
Rocket fuel, Catherine?
I think the takeaway from this Congressional Research Service report is the following, that it's been really impressive, actually, in that we have somehow managed to spend $1.5 trillion to not substantially boost growth, to not substantially boost wages, and to not substantially boost capital investment. So, like, what is it exactly that we are doing other than transferring a massive amount of wealth basically away from future taxpayers and into the pockets of today's shareholders?
What do you say, Adam? $1.5 trillion, and where did it go?
You know, the tax cuts were about making American workers and the people that employ them more productive over the long run. So that the report did say that that the tax cuts did boost investment, that it did have a small, it said, impact on the economy. I think the impact is much larger. But what's really important is how that impact compounds over time. When you sort of spool this out over 5, 10, 20 years, that makes a significant difference to the average American worker, and we're already seeing those benefits today, especially for those folks who need it most. The wage growth for folks at the bottom, the lowest income Americans, is double wage growth at the top, and we can debate as to whether or not this is coming from the deregulatory agenda or the tax cuts or something else, but the economy is doing really well.
This actually is a really important question, and I want to try to get to the answer, right? Because if you're right, and that increase at the bottom, double that of the top, is coming from policies of this president, then that's significant. Catherine, my question to you, though, is how are we going to know? And it's important we find out, because the other thing that's happening is all these Democratic legislatures in many states are pushing minimum wages to 15,
yes,
which could also be what's causing this increase at the bottom, which would be actually Democratic legislatures and Democratic governors and not the president.
And look, it's hard to disentangle all of these different effects, right? But I think the thing to keep in mind is the mechanism by which the supporters of the tax cut argued that it would be boosting the economy. The argument was that it was going to incentivize firms to invest in capital equipment, which we have not actually seen them doing in recent quarters, by which, as a result of that, you would see higher productivity, higher growth, and higher wages. And if you don't have that initial mechanism that we were supposed to see happening, how can you attribute all of these other down-the-line effects, these good things that we have in fact seen, right, low unemployment, how can you actually attribute it to the tax cut if the thing that was supposed to get us from point A to point B isn't actually happening?
And Adam, what's your response to that? I mean, the report also says, right, there were all those bonuses. Remember when they were all announced, and maybe it was companies who were trying to, show Trump they were doing what, he wanted them to do. But that was at the beginning, and then the bonuses didn't happen the next year. And not all those companies gave wage increases. So where did they put the tax cut?
Well, the bonuses were important, but you're right, that's not the mechanism by which the tax cuts are supposed to make all Americans better off. And we did see over the 2016 trend pretty significant upticks in non-residential business investment. We saw upticks in new business applications to start new businesses. There's ample evidence that the pro-growth policies of this administration, including the tax cuts, are make. But that initial investment is what boosts the long run, as economists say, steady state of the economy up one notch, and then we continue on compounding those gains year over year, and that's what we're seeing. That's why businesses keep making.
This initial trigger didn't happen. We saw a nice increase in investment like the first quarter after the tax cuts were passed, which probably would have been things that would have been set in motion before the tax cuts happened, right? So it's really hard to say, oh, businesses were suddenly able to build this factory or what have you, like in the next month after the tax cuts passed. But a year later, we don't see that. We saw equipment investment falling. We saw an increase in IP investment, but again, that's not the mechanism that we're supposed to be talking about here.
Final word, Adam.
The piece of this bill, the lower rate, but also expensing, allowing businesses to write off new investments in the year they're made, this is something that is immediate, and we did see both before the tax cuts because it was available retroactively and right after. And it's too early to tell all of the great news that will come from this law, but the initial reports, I think the American people are feeling.
The law encouraged people to go back in time and change the decisions that they had already made? That doesn't make any sense.
The way that it's reported on the statistics that you're looking at does confuse which quarter it's made, depending on how it's been registered on the balance sheet.
All right,
yes.
we'll hit pause for that for now. And next, Republican Justin Amash, the only Republican in Congress